Moscow, October 1972. The Dynamo Sports Complex on a Thursday evening holds 4,000 people comfortably and 5,000 when the event is significant enough. And tonight, it is holding something close to 5,000. The crowd that fills these seats is not a casual crowd. This is the Soviet boxing community, coaches and practitioners, and serious observers who have spent their lives inside a discipline that the country treats as a legitimate matter of national pride. They know what they are watching, and they know how to watch it. The evening is a showcase tournament, a round-robin exhibition, drawing fighters from across the Soviet Union and a handful of invited observers from international sporting federations. The result of the evening is never genuinely in doubt, because the result of most evenings where Volkov Dmitry is fighting is never genuinely in doubt, but the community comes anyway, because watching a great fighter work at the peak of his ability is worth attending even when the outcome is predetermined. Bruce Lee is in the first row. He is here because a contact in the international film community, a French producer who had been working on a Soviet-European co-production, had arranged access to the evening as part of a broader cultural exchange visit. Bruce had come to Moscow for 3 days of meetings, and someone had suggested the boxing tournament as something worth seeing. He had agreed because he agreed to anything that involved watching serious practitioners at serious work. He bought his seat the same as the other foreign guests and has been sitting in the first row since the doors opened, watching the undercard bouts with the kind of focused attention that looks, from the outside, like calm interest, and is actually something considerably more active than that. Nobody has recognized him. A few people nearby have registered him in the way you register anyone sitting close to you. A brief assessment, a categorization, and then a return to what you were doing. He is a compact Asian man in plain dark clothes, sitting in the first row of a Soviet boxing tournament, and nothing about that picture resolves into any familiar category for the people around him. His name is known in certain circles in Moscow. The Big Boss had found its way to Soviet film distribution through unofficial channels, the kind of back-channel circulation that happened with foreign films in that era, and the martial arts community specifically had some awareness of him. But the boxing community, and the Soviet sports world more broadly, had not yet caught up with what was happening in Asian cinema, and in the first row of the Dynamo Sports Complex tonight, Bruce Lee is genuinely anonymous in a way that he almost never is anymore. This is about to become relevant. Volkov Dmitry is 29 years old and has been boxing since he was 9, which means 20 years of development inside a Soviet sports system that is not gentle about the development of athletes. He is 6'1", 210 pounds, built with the specific solidity of someone who has been conditioned by a system that cares about producing results rather than about the athlete's comfort during the process of producing them. His record in official competition is 37 wins, 2 losses, both of those losses coming in the first 2 years of his professional career, before his technique was fully formed, nothing in the 6 years since. He fights with the controlled aggression of a man who has completely internalized the Soviet boxing style, which emphasizes technical precision and physical dominance simultaneously, the combination of clean technique and genuine punching power that his system has spent decades refining. He is not a showman, he does not perform. He applies his training with the systematic efficiency of someone who views the outcome as an engineering problem rather than an entertainment product. He wins his 4 bouts of the evening without losing a round. The last opponent, a legitimate heavyweight from Leningrad with his own impressive record, lasts 4 rounds because he is legitimate and because he refuses to quit, but the outcome is not genuinely uncertain at any point. After the 4th bout, Volkov takes the microphone. He does this every time. The crowd knows it. They settle into the specific anticipatory quiet of people who have seen this segment before and are watching to see what variation it produces tonight. He says he wants to make his usual offer. He says that serious boxing is about more than tournament competition, that it includes the willingness to test against the unknown, against challenges that come from outside the usual circuit. He says he extends this offer to anyone in the building who believes they have something worth testing. He looks at the front rows, where the serious members of the community sit, with the expression of someone performing generosity while understanding that the generosity will not be tested. He has done this at every tournament for 2 years. Nobody has ever accepted. The silence that follows is the familiar silence of an audience that has observed this ritual enough times to know the shape of it. Then, someone in the first row stands up. The ripple of recognition starts immediately in the rows nearest him, the Soviet martial arts community members who are present as guests of the Boxing Federation, the people who exist at the overlap between disciplines and who have followed the international circuit closely enough to know faces that the boxing crowd doesn't know. The ripple moves outward from there, person to person, quiet and fast. Volkov watches the man stand without recognition. He sees a small Asian man in plain clothes in the first row. and he registers this with the same mild surprise he would register any unusual development, then moves to the practiced graciousness of his usual invitation. But the ripple has become something louder. People are talking now, not the polite murmur of a crowd, but something more agitated. Someone near the front is shaking their head. Someone else is gesturing toward the mat in a way that is clearly meant to discourage, rather than encourage. Several people are standing up themselves, not to accept the challenge, but because they want to see the man in the first row more clearly, or because they need somewhere for their alarm to go. An official near the Soviet Federation table leans toward a colleague and says something. The colleague looks at the first row and goes slightly pale. The man in the first row is already moving toward the mat. He moves through the crowd with the quality of motion that belongs to someone who knows where they are going and has decided to go there without requiring anyone's permission or cooperation. People move out of the way people move out of the way when something has a clear direction and a clear purpose. The crowd's noise has shifted character completely. It is no longer the sports crowd noise of people watching a post-match tradition. It is something more complicated, containing concern and disbelief, and the specific quality of sound that large groups produce when they understand something consequential is happening and are not certain how to respond to it. A Soviet official reaches the mat's edge before Bruce does and attempts to say something. Bruce acknowledges him politely and continues to the mat. The official looks at his colleagues with the expression of a man who has tried the reasonable thing and found the reasonable thing insufficient. Volkov stands on the mat, watching this approach with evolving understanding. He looks at the crowd, which is producing sounds he has not heard it produce in 2 years of these challenges. He looks at the official who tried to intervene. He looks at the man now standing at the edge of the mat. He says something to the official standing nearby. "Who is he?" the official tells him. Volkov looks at Bruce. He looks at him for a long moment with the specific assessment of a man who has been told something he is deciding how much weight to give. Then something in his expression settles into a position that is half skepticism and half something that a more charitable observer might call readiness. He says, loudly enough that the front rows hear it clearly. "The American film actor." He says the word actor with the specific inflection of a language that can put a great deal of meaning into an inflection. "We've heard about you." Very fast on camera. He pauses. "Welcome to come up." He gestures at the mat with the large-armed generosity of a man who is certain of his position. Bruce hears this. He looks at Volkov with the expression he wears when he is in a situation that is clearly going a specific direction and is deciding not to divert it. He smiles. The small, genuine smile of someone who finds something mildly interesting rather than the performed smile of someone managing their presentation. He steps onto the mat. The visual is immediate. The crowd registers it and produces a sound that contains several things at once. Volkov is 6'1" and 210 pounds in competitive condition. Bruce is 5'7" and 140 pounds on a well-fed day. The arithmetic of this picture is obvious to everyone in the building, and the crowd is not entirely neutral. This is 1972 in Moscow, and the man on the mat who just arrived is American, which is a category that carries weight in this room, and not the kind of weight that helps him. Several people are actively hostile, calling out in Russian in tones that don't require translation. More people are simply alarmed. The alarm of a community watching one of its members about to do something they believe he doesn't understand the implications of. A referee materializes between them. Exhibition only. Light contact. No intent to injure. Both men acknowledge this. Volkov, with a slight nod that says he is being generous. Bruce, with the simple nod of someone confirming a logistical detail. They find their positions. Volkov settles into his boxing stance, the precise technical stance of 20 years of Soviet training, weight perfectly distributed, hands at exact heights, chin tucked at the trained angle. Everything correct and nothing wasted. Anyone watching who understood boxing could see immediately that he had earned his record honestly. Bruce stands the way he stands. The crowd reads this as not knowing what he is doing, because the crowd knows boxing stances, and this is not a boxing stance, and therefore to a boxing crowd, it looks like an absence of preparation. But it isn't. It is a different relationship to preparation, one that isn't organized around any single discipline's templates. The referee indicates they can begin. Volkov comes forward. He is not aggressive in the sense of reckless. He is assertive, measuring distance with his jab the way boxers measure distance, the jab as information-gathering tool rather than primary weapon. It comes out fast and technically clean, aimed at understanding where this person is and how he moves. Bruce's head isn't where the jab expected it. He has moved offline, a small angular shift that takes his head outside the jab's trajectory, and as the jab extends past him, his right hand comes up and touches Volkov's extended wrist. Light contact. Brief, more like a notation than a response. Volkov retracts the jab and reassesses. The thing that has just happened is not something his 20 years of preparation has given him a specific category for. He knows what a slip looks like, a defensive movement outside the punch's line. What he just experienced wasn't quite that. It was something more anticipatory, something that seemed to be responding to the intention of the jab before the jab had fully committed to being a jab. He throws the cross. This is the technique he trusts. The right hand, carrying the full rotation of his shoulder and hip. Genuine punching power built from 2 decades of conditioning. The kind of punch that has ended serious fighters. Bruce slips it to his right, the punch passing beside his ear, and his left hand touches Volkov's extended shoulder. Again, the light contact. Again, the notation. The crowd is making the sound of people whose expectations have been disrupted. Not the hostile sound from a moment ago. A different sound, more uncertain, more attentive. Volkov steps back. He looks at Bruce. His expression is doing something that is not quite irritation and not quite confusion. A mixture of both that comes from encountering something that doesn't resolve into your existing framework. He comes forward with a combination, the standard 2-3 that he has thrown 10,000 times, jab setting up the cross, both of them setting up the left hook, the combination moving as a single flowing unit rather than 3 separate techniques. Bruce moves through the middle of it, inside the jab which passes over his shoulder, away from the cross before it commits, inside the hook, getting close enough that the hook can't develop its arc, and from that inside position his hand finds Volkov's ribs. One contact, placed precisely, held for a fraction of a second longer than the previous ones. Volkov stops. He genuinely stops. Not a tactical pause, an actual stop. The stop of someone who needs a moment to process what just happened to his combination. 20 seconds. The crowd has gone substantially quieter. The hostile energy from a minute ago has not disappeared, but it has been complicated by what the crowd is watching, which is a boxing champion working at genuine effort and failing to connect cleanly with a man considerably smaller than him. Volkov says something to Bruce in Russian. Bruce doesn't speak Russian, but the tone is clear enough. He is saying this was luck, and the next exchange will demonstrate that. Bruce simply waits. Volkov attacks again, this time without the measuring jab, going directly to his most powerful combination, the one he reserves for opponents who need finishing rather than feeling out. It comes with genuine commitment and genuine speed, the best technique he has at full effort. Bruce slips the first punch and deflects the second, with a touch to Volkov's forearm, and steps inside the third, and his right hand comes to rest against Volkov's jaw. 2 inches away, touching nothing. He holds it there for 2 full seconds. The hall is completely silent. He lowers his hand. He steps back to neutral. Volkov stands in the position the exchange has put him in, and what is on his face is no longer the skepticism from before. That has been replaced by something more genuine and less managed, the expression of someone who has just received information that their existing framework doesn't fully account for. He says something in Russian. A translator near the front row renders it in English. "How are you doing this?" Bruce says, "Your shoulder tells me where the punch is going before your hand does." Volkov blinks. "My shoulder." "Left shoulder," Bruce says. It rises slightly before any left-handed technique, about 1/3 of a second. It doesn't matter which technique follows. The shoulder tells you the technique is starting. Volkov's left shoulder moves involuntarily as he processes this, the body checking the description against its own sense of itself. The crowd watches this exchange with the focused attention of people who have stopped expecting what they expected when this began, and are now watching something else, something they don't have a prior category for, and are constructing a new one to contain. An official from the Boxing Federation has made his way to the edge of the mat. He says something in Russian that carries the tone of administrative concern. A higher-up who is watching his post-match program becomes something he didn't plan. Volkov holds up one hand without looking at the official. He looks at Bruce. "Show me again," he says. They reset. This time Volkov approaches differently. He has taken the information about his shoulder and is consciously trying to manage it, to throw the punch without the tell, to close the gap between his intention and his execution. This is a real attempt at adjustment, the kind of real-time correction that 20 years of serious training makes possible. The tell is smaller. Bruce notices this and acknowledges it with the smallest possible nod. He still reads it. The shoulder has been partially corrected, but the weight shift that precedes the shoulder has not been corrected, because Volkov doesn't yet know about the weight shift, and the weight shift happens first and tells the same story. Bruce moves before the punch arrives, and from the outside of Volkov's lead leg, his right hand comes up and stops at Volkov's chin. The same held placement from a different angle. Volkov's expression now contains something that is the beginning of genuine learning rather than just surprise. He says, "The weight shift." Bruce says, "Before the shoulder." Volkov says, "How long have you known that?" Bruce says, "Since your first punch." Volkov is quiet for a moment. He looks at the crowd, which is watching this conversation with the silence of people who are watching something they will be discussing for a long time. He looks at the Federation official at the edge of the mat. He looks at Bruce. He says, "I have been boxing for 20 years. No one has told me this." Bruce says, "Most people are watching the punch. The information is in what comes before it." Volkov processes this. Then he does something that the crowd, which has been watching him fight for years, has not seen him do after any of the 37 victories they have witnessed. He bows, not a deep ceremonial bow. The short, direct bow of one serious person to another, acknowledging something real. Bruce returns it. The hall responds. Not the hostile response from the beginning of the evening, and not the confused response of 20 minutes ago. Something warmer and more genuine, the response of people who have watched a situation they expected to go one way, go somewhere else entirely, and who are receiving that somewhere else with honesty. The Federation official at the mat's edge looks at his colleagues with the expression of a man revising what kind of evening he is managing. Afterward, in the corridor outside the main hall, Volkov finds Bruce, before Bruce leaves the building. He is still in his competition clothes. He says he has a question. Bruce says, "Go ahead." Volkov says, "The weight shift. If I correct it, how long before it is gone from my technique?" Bruce thinks about this honestly. He says, "It depends on how deeply the pattern is established, but that correcting something at the weight transfer level, rather than the technique level, is slower work because it is deeper." He says months, probably with specific training aimed at it. He says the correction will temporarily make the technique less powerful, while the new pattern is being established. Volkov listens to all of this with the attention of someone who is going to act on what they hear. He asks two more specific questions about the weight transfer and where exactly it originates in the mechanics of his stance. Bruce answers both. Volkov says, "Why are you telling me this?" Bruce says, "Because you asked honestly, and because it is the useful thing." Volkov is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "I called you a film actor when you came up." Bruce says, "I know." Volkov says, "I was wrong." Bruce says, "You didn't have information." Volkov says, "Now I have information." He extends his hand. Bruce takes it. They shake hands in the corridor of the Dynamo Sports Complex, and then Volkov walks back toward the dressing rooms, and Bruce walks toward the exit. The evening produces exactly the conversation in the Soviet boxing community that an evening like this tends to produce when it happens in a tight-knit community of serious people. The accounts are consistent because the people who saw it had no reason to embellish something that was already extraordinary, and because the front rows had been close enough to see clearly. Volkov trains the weight shift correction over the following 4 months. His cornermen notice the change in his footwork before he tells them about it, the small difference in how his weight loads before his combinations, the additional fraction of a second before commitment that the new pattern requires. He wins his next 3 fights after Moscow. The people who watch him closely say his technique has become harder to read, that the tells are smaller, that something in his initiation has changed. He doesn't explain this to anyone for several years. When he eventually does, in a conversation with a younger fighter he is coaching, he says that the most useful technical lesson he received in his career came from a single conversation in a corridor after a tournament in Moscow, from a man he had dismissively called a film actor before knowing who he was, who had spent 20 seconds inside his combinations and then spent 20 minutes explaining precisely what he had found there. He says that the lesson was not really about the weight shift, though the weight shift was real, and fixing it improved his boxing. The lesson was about what you miss when you decide what something is before you have actually looked at it. He says he had called a man a film actor. The man had walked onto his mat and shown him something about his own technique that 20 years of serious training had not shown him. The gap between those two things, between what he had decided was true and what was actually true, was the lesson that he carried forward into everything that came after. He tells his younger fighters this story when they are preparing to assess an unfamiliar opponent. He tells them that the assessment you make before contact is always provisional, that the real information comes from the exchange itself, that deciding what something is before you have felt it is the most reliable way to miss what is actually there. He says this came from a Thursday night in October in Moscow, when a stranger stood up from the first row, and he pointed at the stranger and said, "Come up." And the stranger came up and showed him what happens when the map you have drawn of yourself does not match the territory. He says he is grateful for it. He says it took him longer than it should have to be grateful, that the gratitude came after the embarrassment faded, which took a while. But it came. The weight shift is smaller now, after 20 years of working on it. Still not gone. He doesn't think it will ever be fully gone, but smaller, and therefore less readable, and therefore less of a problem. Smaller is enough. Smaller means the information he is giving away before his punches arrive is less information than it used to be, which means the people across from him have less warning than they used to have, which means some of them who would have seen it before don't see it now. He thinks about the man from the first row sometimes, when he is coaching, when he is watching a fighter make an error that the fighter doesn't know they are making. He thinks about the specificity of what the man told him, not the generality of work on your technique, but the precise identification of a precise problem in a precise location, in a precise moment, before a precise technique. He thinks it is the most useful thing anyone has ever told him about himself. He doesn't know if the man is still alive. He finds out, eventually, and he sits with the news for a while, before going back to whatever he was doing. He goes back to coaching. He goes back to the work. He keeps the corridor conversation the way you keep things that change the shape of something important, close and available, returned to, when it is useful, which is often. The weight shift is smaller. The information it gives away is less. The lesson that produced the work is still present, still running, still doing what it was always doing, from the moment a stranger stood up in the first row and accepted an invitation that everyone else in the building understood you didn't accept.